The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And we all want to be on that part of the future which has been already arrived. But however, there is a practice in software industry where we are not at that part yet. And conference speakers talk about this topic for more than 10 years now. And yet we must observe in our company that we have one single project that successfully and undoubtedly succeeded with this technique, with test-driven development, as you may have guessed. Since the last sessions talked about this very same topic, or at least some similar, I won't go into details about TDD, so how you actually practice it. Instead, we will take a look on why test first, and especially TDD, is hard in legacy project, which we are also practicing, and what were the successful approaches or practices which worked for us, and a special focus on how testers, which I assume most of you are, can actually contribute to getting TDD work. And we will take a look on some motivational challenge or some change management perspective of this concept. So my name is SZÖKtomCS, and as it was mentioned, I'm a software architect and a developer, and not a tester by myself. And why I brought this topic to here? Because I think that the testers can have a great influence also on developer teams about practicing TDD correctly. And our main sources of observations were different projects within Evosoft. And where we undoubtedly succeeded, no surprise, it's a greenfield project. The first line of code in this project, after doing some spikes, was a test written in TDD. And they are still doing it, they are still practicing it on a daily basis. On the other projects, where we have some legacy with several hundred millions of code, it is much more challenge. But our struggle still rewarded us with some learnings, which I can now share with you. So what were our biggest problems, our biggest issues when we tried to introduce TDD in our teams? The first one is a programming issue. We heard about it before. It's how our system is designed. We have a structure which is very hard to write a single unit test in it, and we have a lot of practices how to do it correctly. It was already mentioned, that book, Michael Feder's book about working with legacy code. I can also recommend it. What is more interesting here is the process. And we almost completely switched to Agile within our project, but we still have this legacy in the process. And the big problem with this process is that it almost completely separates the verification from the design and the implementation. And this can manifest in different tester teams, different system test team, or it can manifest inside a Scrum team that we have testers' roles and developers' roles. And this separation is very deeply rooted in our profession, in our mindset. And to demonstrate this, I can show you some very basic terminology. How do you call that testing method when you take the internals of a system under test into account and you have the source code? It's called white box testing. And the other one is black box testing. And that's all. And it doesn't matter which one you choose. This implies something important. You always have a box. And it suggests something which is also very natural, that you first have your box, and then you write the test. But for the test first concept, we don't really have a name within this terminology. So in test first we have the test, and then we make the box. And if you allow me to give a name for this kind of testing, I would call it the nothing box testing. And it requires some kind of abstraction to test something which is not yet present. And this is especially hard for us developers. It is so convenient for us to just open the box and look what's inside and do some step-by-step debugging to see what's going on. And it can be challenging for testers, and there is no software to run. There is nothing to touch. There's nothing to click on. And still, you as testers have a great advantage in contrast with developers. Your mind is free from implementation details. And therefore, you can learn this technique, these test-first techniques, much easier and much quicker than developers. And therefore, you can maybe help them in this transition. So we already found out that test-driven development is not really infectious. It's very hard to introduce, especially in legacy projects. And this suggests something that, what if we use other test-first techniques which can introduce a mindset to use it during test-driven development? I will show you one technique where we succeeded, which was very useful for us. And this is called the risk-based testing. I will show you how this risk-based testing works in our user stories, in our Scrum teams. These are different stages of a user story in our teams, and how the risk-based testing works in this process. First, the product owner delivers a story, and then the team sits together on a risk-based test meeting, some members of the team, not everyone, and they try to collect all the risks which can be associated with this story. And the most important part that already a system tester or an experienced tester can be there. So they identify the risks related to the story, and as you can see, we are long before the implementation. Then they try to prioritize these risks. They give some numbers to them, some probability, what kind of damage it can cause, what is the test effectiveness. They can even use some kind of metrics like return of test investments and so on. And they have a prioritized list, and they can go to a planning meeting when they decide which tasks are needed to implement this story. And during this planning meeting, they define a test strategy, so they can decide at which risks, how, and with which test will be handled. Whether they will be automated, where we use a UI test, which risk can be tested only with manual test, and we are still before the implementation. And then they are testing and developing it, actually, and they are doing a successful demo, and everyone is happy. In a happy day scenario, of course. So here, for example, we did a quick risk-based testing before the presentation regarding the clicker, and we found that the probability of the clicker does not work is very high, and so I have a backup clicker back there named András, who can do some clicking for me if this goes wrong. But it's working pretty good now. So in this model, we see that risk-based testing was quite infectious, and it can bring the team towards a test-first mindset. Another example for a similar practice is specification by example, or BDD as we saw it before. And the good thing that I didn't want to go into details of this technique, and it was already mentioned very, very deeply, so I can just quickly go through. So why it is important in our aspect. As you saw, the specification by example uses a structure named Gherkin to define the examples which can be executed later as tests. And this has the structure the given, when, then, which is nothing more than some preconditions, doing some action, and validating some post conditions. And the good thing that TDD uses a very similar structure when we write unit tests. It's the arrange, assert, which is also nothing more than some precondition, action, and post condition. And this structure should be very, very familiar for you. And this means that you as testers can introduce and foster this test-first technique, BDD or ATDD or specification by example in your team. And with this, you can reuse actually this concept during TDD. You allow the developers to understand better this concept. When we try to introduce TDD in our team, we also try different models which may help us. We tried the Kotler's 8-step model for leading change. We tried the Kirkpatrick model for learning effectiveness. And we also tried the Daniel Pink's model on intrinsic motivation. And what really helped us was Daniel Pink's model on motivation. If you are interested in other two, I can gladly share our experiences after the presentation. Now I want to go into details of this model. This model says that if you want to introduce a new technique and you also want that the team stays motivated, then you need to give them a purpose. Why they are doing it? What is the reason behind? You also give to them autonomy so they can decide when exactly they use it or whether they use it, which situations. And they need also mastery so they can learn the required techniques. They know how to do it right. And let's see why risk-based testing was so motivating in our teams. First, it's easy to master. It's a very simple technique which can be learned very quickly. That works on the mastery part. Second, it gives the team autonomy because it doesn't say anything how those risks you find should be tested. It is up to the team. So that's why it is so motivating, according to this model. Other two practices which we found useful are test ownership and coding dojos. I will go on test ownership first. So under test ownership, I understand that the developer team has autonomy, responsibility, and freedom about how they deliver a story which is well tested. And I share you an example about a story about this test ownership. In one of the teams we were mentoring, after several demos, the product owner asked a provoking question, unexpectedly asked a provoking question from the team after the demo. And it was that, may the god of clicker. So we were at that part, the product owner asked a provoking question. Would you give the software as it is now, as it is currently, to the customer? And the team was, I don't know. To answer this question, we have to do more tests. So then, would you give it or not? Are you going to ask this question after every demo from now on? Yes, I intend to do so. But then we need to do more testing. This will slow us down. So then, sooner or later, we will have to give the software to customer. When exactly you want to define which tests are needed? And this team faced the first time what test ownership really means. And according to this model, the product owner just gave the team a purpose about why they need to do more testing, why they need to do twice as much testing than before. And they also gave them autonomy, because it was not forced how they do this testing. It's up to the team. If you try to push it, and you force the team that they have to use TDD from now on, they might do it, but they won't stay motivated. Another technique I would like to shortly present to you are coding dojos. So on a normal dojo, the attendees practice a specific movement over and over and over again. And on a coding dojo, developers practice some programming skills over and over and over again. And why I find the coding dojos so effective because they simply work very good according to this model. The team can practice on very different programming examples, and TDD requires a lot of programming skills. We need to learn how to do refactoring. We need to do how to do clean code in some legacy code. We need to do how to write good unit tests, and so on. So we can learn these skills very autonomously and very easily during these dojos. Everyone is working on the same problem, and we can learn from each other. Another good thing of dojos, that if someone in the developer team is struggling with a problem, they can bring it to the dojo, and they can experiment on it in a safe environment where failure is tolerated, even welcomed. We can learn from it what failures are behind. And therefore, the failures are not in the productive environment. So according to this model, the dojos are very effective. It might give the team a purpose about why they are doing this practice. They can use it in their daily work. They give them mastery because they can learn slowly the skills required for the TDD. And they also give them autonomy because the team sooner or later can decide which topics they will use on these dojos. So, if I want to summarize what you need, according to this model, to infect people with a test-first mindset, with TDD, then give them some quality expectations so they have a purpose. Why are they doing it? Invest time in learning. It takes a lot of time. A TDD transition can be comparable with an agile transition. Allow the team to choose the test practices they use. They are the best to decide when they start with TDD and how exactly they are going to use it. So you can give autonomy to them, and therefore the team can stay motivated. And as a tester, you can especially support the team by introducing test-first concept. And in the end, I would like to give you a user story which you can take home. As a developer, I want you, the testers, to foster test drive methods in your team and drive development so that we can distribute that future more evenly together. Thank you very much.
Okay, the first question. Do you use risk poker? If so,
risk poker.
How?
We are using planning poker sometimes. No, we don't use risk poker. We just simply try to collect the risks. But it sounds an interesting idea, so maybe we will.
Okay, the next question. What type of programming skills are the most important for a QA to be able to work efficiently with devs in TDD?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because you do not require to have strong programming skills. Of course, it doesn't hurt if you know how to program. But during a TDD dojo, we are actually working in pairs. So you always have, you have a pair of developers, so you can do it in pair programming, and therefore one can do the thinking, how you should formulate a test, and the other pair write the code behind. So in this case, the tester or a quality engineer can be that part who formulate the test cases which are needed, and the developer can do the coding. So that is possible. And now we are experimenting also with this approach.
Okay, we still have time for a couple of questions.
Testers and developers require a different mindset. Good question again. So yes and no. So the testing, I'm not an ESTQB professional, but I know that testing should be independent on some level. So I think this requires some separation of testing and maybe a different mindset from a testers. But on the other hand, this test-first mindset, I think it's quite common. And the lack of test-first mindset in development can be strengthened by testers. So this actually can be a common thing. What was the addition of TDD? Yeah, so the addition is that we were struggling with a lot of legacy code. As I said, we have hundreds of millions of code. And with this, you cannot simply work. So it's very hard to implement. So with TDD, we cannot simply use TDD in a manner in a greenfield project. We have to use in a manner what was described in the previous session, that we take a legacy code and we try to surround it with tests, and we want to test drive a new implementation, for example, in it. And this gives us safety or safety feeling. So that's what it adds. At the end, it gives us some value in quality and maybe in speed or in design. But this takes a long time.